The sun had barely risen over the quiet suburban streets when Marcus noticed it. A black leather wallet, sitting alone on the sidewalk, slightly askew beside the curb. He had been on his way to school, eyes fixed on the ground as he scuffed his sneakers along the pavement, his mind somewhere else, lost in the usual teenage worries. But the sight of the wallet stopped him in his tracks. It wasn't just any wallet. It was expensive, the kind of thing you wouldn't expect to see lying carelessly on a street corner. No one was around. The neighborhood was still quiet, the early morning stillness hanging in the air. Marcus looked up and down the street, but there was no one in sight. Not a single person to claim it. His first instinct was to walk away. He had seen wallets lying on the ground before, never anything like this, but it was the kind of situation where it was better to pretend you didn't notice, wasn't it? If he picked it up, there was the possibility that someone might accuse him of stealing it. What if it had been left there as a trap? What if the owner had simply dropped it and was waiting to see who took it? But the wallet called to him. He crouched down, hesitating for only a moment before picking it up. His hands were surprisingly steady as he turned it over, studying the craftsmanship of the leather. It was genuine, not the kind of cheap material you'd find in a corner shop. It was sleek, black, and had a subtle embossed logo in the corner that Marcus didn't recognize. His heart raced slightly, though not from excitement. His instincts told him this wallet was more than just a lost item. It felt important. He could almost hear the pounding of his heart in his ears, each beat faster than the last. Holding it, he couldn't help but wonder, what's the catch? After a moment's pause, he opened the wallet. The first thing he saw was a thick stack of cash, at least several $100s, stacked neatly, held together by a rubber band. His fingers brushed over it, then recoiled. He was staring at a small fortune. Beneath the cash were a few credit cards, a few receipts, and a driver's license. He pulled the license out slowly, the name printed on it clearly, Richard Lawson. It took a second for the name to register in his mind, and when it did, it hit him like a wave. Richard Lawson. The name had appeared in the news more than once. He had seen the billionaire's face plastered across the front pages of business magazines, and his company's successes were regularly mentioned in reports about the city's economy. Lawson was a millionaire businessman who owned several high-end properties, a sprawling mansion in the city, and was known for his lavish lifestyle. The idea that such a high-profile person could lose something as important as this wallet seemed impossible. Yet here it was, in his hands. The wallet felt heavy now, not just with cash, but with the weight of responsibility. Marcus stared at it for a few moments longer, unsure of what to do. He could just keep it. Who would know? No one was around, and it was clear that someone with money, like Mr. Lawson, probably wouldn't even miss it. But then again, that wasn't Marcus. His mother had raised him to do the right thing, no matter how difficult it might be. And this wasn't his property. He knew what he had to do. Without another thought, he slipped the wallet into his jacket pocket and started walking toward the nearest payphone. The bell above the door to the corner shop jingled as he entered, but the store was still empty except for the cashier wiping down the counter. The phone booth was tucked away in the back corner. He walked toward it, fighting a rising sense of unease. What if he was making a mistake? What if this was all some sort of trap? But the thought of returning the wallet nagged at him, urging him to do the right thing. He dropped the coins into the phone, dialing the number on the driver's license, his fingers trembling just a little. As the phone rang, he tried to prepare himself for the worst, but there was no turning back now. After a few rings, a voice answered on the other end. "Hello?" The voice sounded slightly gruff, but polite. Mr. Lawson? I found your wallet," Marcus stammered. It's in perfect condition." There was a long pause on the other end, a rustling sound followed by a soft chuckle. "Well, that's certainly a relief. Thank you for calling." Where are you? Marcus's heart was pounding now. I'm at my school. I can bring it to you if you want. The voice on the other end paused again, as if weighing his words. Sure. I'll be there in about 10 minutes. Wait for me in front of the school. The line went dead, and Marcus stood there for a moment, the phone still pressed to his ear, unsure of what just happened. He didn't expect this kind of personal reaction from someone like Richard Lawson. The man could have sent an assistant or asked him to mail it back. But for some reason, he wanted to meet Marcus in person. It was a strange feeling, a mix of relief and anxiety. But there was no turning back. He wasn't about to keep the wallet now. That wasn't how he was raised. Marcus left the payphone booth and walked back to the school. He had to tell his teacher he was stepping out. But before he reached the door, something caught his eye. It was a man standing across the street, hidden in the shadows, watching him. The man's eyes locked onto his with an intensity that sent a chill down Marcus's spine. There was something unsettling about the way he stood, so still and observing. The man didn't move, didn't say anything. He just watched. Marcus swallowed hard, shaking the feeling off as he continued toward the school. Maybe it was nothing. Just someone waiting for a bus. But the unease stayed with him. By the time Marcus arrived at the front of the school, Richard Lawson was waiting there. The man was dressed sharply, his suit impeccable. He looked every bit the billionaire, with a confident, almost detached demeanor. He stepped forward as Marcus approached, his expression a mix of gratitude and curiosity. "Thank you so much for returning this," Lawson said, taking the wallet from Marcus. His hand was firm but not overpowering. "You have no idea how much this means." Marcus nodded, his throat dry. "No problem, sir. I'm just glad it didn't get lost for good." Lawson smiled, but there was a strange flicker in his eyes, a flicker that Marcus couldn't place. "You're a good kid. Most people wouldn't do what you did." Marcus felt the weight of those words, but before he could respond, something else caught his attention. The same man who had been watching him across the street was now standing much closer, leaning against a nearby lamppost. His gaze was still fixed on Marcus, and this time it was more intense. The chill returned. But Marcus didn't say anything. Instead, he turned to leave, the strange encounter lingering in his mind. As he walked back to the school, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. What was the deal with that man? And why had Lawson seemed so interested in him? The sound of the school bell ringing jolted him out of his thoughts. He didn't have time to dwell on it. Minutes later, Marcus was sitting in class, trying to focus on the lesson, but his mind kept wandering back to that strange interaction. He didn't know why, but he felt like something wasn't right. The way the man had watched him. The way Lawson had thanked him, almost too eagerly. Then, just as the teacher started speaking, the loudspeaker crackled to life. "Attention all students," the principal's voice echoed through the halls. "Please remain in your classrooms. Police are on their way. Do not leave until further notice." Marcus froze, his heart skipping a beat. Police? What did the police have to do with anything? Had he done something wrong? Had he made a mistake by returning the wallet? He couldn't understand why the police would be involved. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from his best friend, Kyle. "Dude, they're looking for you. Cops are here. What did you do?" This expanded version keeps the suspense high and adds more detail to the interactions, setting up the mystery for the rest of the story. The tension builds as Marcus is thrust into an unexpected situation, and the twist at the end leaves the audience eager for what happens. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the phone in his hand. The buzzing stopped, but the message from Kyle still echoed in his mind. "Dude, they're looking for you. Cops are here. What did you do?" His mind raced. The last thing he had expected this morning was for the police to be involved in anything. All he'd done was return a lost wallet. He'd acted with honesty, trying to do the right thing, something his mother had always taught him. So why were the police here? He looked around the classroom. His classmates were whispering among themselves, clearly rattled by the announcement on the loudspeaker. Marcus was no exception. He couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was terribly wrong. He had barely settled back into his seat when the door swung open, and two uniformed officers stepped in. The classroom fell silent. The officers' eyes scanned the room before they settled on Marcus. The tension in the air thickened. Everyone held their breath as one of the officers, a tall man with a strong build, walked toward him. "Marcus Simmons?" the officer asked, his voice firm but not unfriendly. Marcus nodded, his throat dry. "Yeah, that's me." "We need you to come with us, son," the officer said, his voice now taking on a more serious tone. "You're not in trouble. We just need to ask you a few questions." Marcus stood up, his hands trembling slightly. "Is this about the wallet?" "I swear, I didn't do anything wrong. I just found it and returned it to the owner." The officer didn't respond immediately, just gave a small nod. "Let's step outside, and we'll talk." As Marcus followed the officer through the hallway, he felt like the walls were closing in. The other students were watching him with a mix of curiosity and confusion. What had he done? It was just a wallet. He had done something good, hadn't he? But as they reached the main entrance of the school, the truth began to sink in. The police weren't just here for routine questioning. There was more to this than he could understand. Outside, a black SUV was parked at the curb. The second officer, a woman with short, cropped hair, stood by the car with a serious expression. She glanced over at Marcus as he approached. "We're just going to take a short drive, Marcus," the first officer said. "We'll clear everything up." Marcus hesitated for a moment, his mind racing. He hadn't expected to be dragged into anything like this. But the officer had said he wasn't in trouble. Maybe they just wanted some clarification. He got into the back seat of the SUV, and the two officers followed him in. The engine roared to life, and the car pulled away from the school parking lot. The tension inside the vehicle was palpable. Marcus stared out the window, the landscape blurring as they drove deeper into the city. The officer's voice broke the silence. "We need to talk about the man who owns that wallet, Richard Lawson." Marcus turned to look at him, his stomach sinking. "What about him?" "I just returned the wallet. I didn't think it was a big deal." The officer met his gaze, his expression unreadable. "It's more than just a wallet, Marcus. Richard Lawson has a reputation. A lot of people don't take kindly to someone in his position. We think you might have gotten caught up in something bigger than you realize." Marcus's confusion deepened. "What do you mean? I didn't do anything wrong. I just found the wallet and gave it back to him." The woman in the front seat spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "It's not that simple. Mr. Lawson is involved in some pretty serious business dealings. We need to know everything you can tell us about your interaction with him." The car was speeding now, weaving through the city streets, heading toward a district Marcus didn't recognize. He didn't know what was happening, but his instincts screamed that he was in over his head. The officer beside him spoke again, this time softer, more persuasive. "Marcus, we understand you didn't mean to get involved in anything illegal. But the truth is, you might have just become a pawn in something dangerous. If you want to get ahead of this, you need to help us understand everything that happened." Marcus sat back, trying to process everything. All he had wanted to do was help. He never expected anything in return. But now, with the police involved, he realized that the wallet, and the man who owned it, were at the center of something far more complicated than he had imagined. As the SUV turned down a narrow street, the car slowed. The officers' gazes were fixed forward, and Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. They stopped in front of a high-rise building. The exterior was sleek, modern, with tinted windows and black marble floors. The doors to the lobby opened automatically as they stepped inside, and the air felt heavy with anticipation. The officer beside Marcus didn't wait for him to ask any questions. This is where Mr. Lawson works. He's not just a businessman, he's a key figure in some very high-profile deals, and we think his loss of the wallet might be connected to something bigger. We need to know everything you can about your interaction with him. The elevator ride was silent, and Marcus's palms were sweaty. The questions swirled in his mind. How had he gotten into all of this? He had no answers. He had returned a wallet. Nothing more, nothing less. When the elevator doors opened, they stepped into a sleek, modern office. There were large windows overlooking the city, and the walls were decorated with contemporary art. A tall, well-dressed man greeted them. "Detective Harris, Officer Wilkins," the man said, his tone businesslike. "I'm glad you could make it. I'm Richard Lawson." Marcus froze. The man who had given him the wallet, the man who had thanked him profusely just hours ago, was standing right in front of him. The very same person the police had been talking about. Lawson's expression was calm, but his eyes were calculating. He looked at Marcus with a slight smile. "I'm sure you have questions," Lawson said, his voice smooth and almost too polite. "But I think we can work this out, don't you?" Marcus could barely speak. I don't know what's going on. I just returned your wallet. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." Lawson's smile didn't falter. "Oh, I'm sure you didn't. But you see, Marcus, things are never as simple as they seem, are they?" Marcus's mind raced as he realized the truth. This wasn't just about a lost wallet. The moment he had picked it up, he had unknowingly stepped into something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. And now, there was no way out. Lawson stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Marcus. "The question is, Marcus, what do you really know about that wallet?" Marcus could barely focus as Richard Lawson's words swirled around him. The office, once so sleek and modern, now felt like a cage. The walls seemed to close in, and he fought the urge to step back, to run out of the room, but he knew he couldn't. Not yet. Not until he understood what was really going on. The tall, confident businessman, Lawson, stood in front of him with an air of superiority that made Marcus feel small. It was as though Lawson knew something Marcus didn't, something that put him in the middle of a dangerous game. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He felt his heart hammer in his chest, his palms growing clammy. He had no idea what was happening. He had simply found a wallet and returned it. What was so complicated about that? Lawson, noticing Marcus's silence, smiled again, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was calculating, like a predator watching its prey. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into, do you?" Lawson's voice was soft, almost too calm for the situation. "But don't worry. I'm sure you'll understand soon enough." Marcus swallowed hard, forcing himself to speak. "I don't understand. I just returned your wallet. That's all. I didn't mean to cause any problems." Lawson's expression hardened slightly, though his tone remained eerily calm. "It's never just that simple, Marcus. A wallet might seem like a small thing, but it's tied to something much bigger. You've unknowingly become a part of a larger issue. And whether you like it or not, you're involved now." Marcus tried to process the words. He was in a daze, like he was listening to a conversation that didn't involve him. He had done something good, right? He had returned a lost wallet, and this man had thanked him. Why was he now making it seem like Marcus had done something wrong? The officer, Detective Harris, stepped in, his voice breaking through the tension in the room. We need to get to the bottom of this, Mr. Lawson. I'm sure Marcus didn't know what he was walking into. He's just a kid, and the last thing he needs is to be caught in your web of business dealings." Lawson didn't flinch. He simply nodded, as if he had expected this response. "Of course. But the problem, detective, is that Marcus isn't just an innocent bystander. He's involved now, whether he realizes it or not." Marcus looked at Harris, his confusion growing by the second. "What do you mean? I didn't know anything about any business deal when I found that wallet. I just—" Lawson interrupted him, his voice sharp now. "That wallet, Marcus, didn't just hold money. It held information. Information that many people would kill to get their hands on. And you, being the good Samaritan that you are, didn't realize what you were picking up." Marcus's mind reeled. He had no idea what Lawson was talking about. What kind of information could a wallet hold that was so important? What could it possibly have to do with him? He was just a regular teenager. He was nothing special. Detective Harris, sensing Marcus's confusion, spoke again. "What Lawson is trying to say, Marcus, is that the wallet was part of something much bigger. It was connected to some shady dealings. Some very dangerous people." Marcus's stomach churned. "I didn't know. I didn't know any of that," he whispered. "I just found it, and I wanted to do the right thing." Lawson stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "The right thing? You think returning the wallet was the right thing? Do you know what that wallet had in it, Marcus? Do you?" Marcus swallowed hard, shaking his head. "No. I didn't even look inside." Lawson's gaze flickered briefly, as if he was considering whether to trust Marcus with more information. Finally, he sighed, his expression softening just a little. "You're telling the truth, I can see that. You didn't look inside. But that doesn't change the fact that by returning it to me, you've just tangled yourself up in a very dangerous situation." Marcus was on the edge of panic. "What do you mean? What kind of dangerous situation?" Lawson paused, his eyes studying Marcus intently. Then, without breaking eye contact, he slowly spoke. "The information in that wallet wasn't just about money. It was connected to an upcoming deal. A deal that could change everything. And people will stop at nothing to get what's in that wallet." Marcus's mind was spinning. He could barely keep up with the conversation. The wallet had information? A business deal? People would kill for it? He had no idea what Lawson was talking about, but it sounded like something straight out of a thriller. Detective Harris cleared his throat, his face serious. "That's why we need you to tell us everything, Marcus. The wallet, along with what it contained, has drawn attention from the wrong people. If we can't figure out what exactly happened and you found it, we won't be able to protect you." Protect him? Marcus felt a cold chill run down his spine. He had never been in a situation like this before. He had no idea who he could trust, or what was really going on. All he wanted was to go back to his normal life, to forget about this whole mess. But it was clear now that wasn't going to happen. Lawson took a step back, his eyes flicking between Marcus and Detective Harris. "I've already made the call. You're not going anywhere for now, Marcus. It's too dangerous." The officer's tone was firm, almost warning. "We don't want to scare you, but you need to understand. You're involved now. It's not just about returning a wallet. It's about what you don't know. And we need you to help us figure out what that is." Marcus's heart was racing again. His hands were shaking. He could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. This wasn't just some misunderstanding. People were after him. And whatever information had been in that wallet was the key to it all. Lawson spoke again, his voice calm but with a hint of urgency. "Marcus, we're not trying to intimidate you. But you need to understand something. There are people who will stop at nothing to get their hands on what was in that wallet. People with power, influence, and a willingness to kill for it. Marcus couldn't process all of this. How had he gotten involved in something like this? All he had wanted to do was return a lost wallet. He didn't want to be part of a dangerous game. But it was too late now. He had been pulled in, and there was no way out. Suddenly, Marcus's phone buzzed again. It was Kyle. He quickly glanced at the message. "Where are you? What's going on with the cops? Everyone's talking about it." Marcus didn't know how to answer. He couldn't explain it. Not without putting himself, and maybe even Kyle, at risk. Detective Harris noticed the phone and spoke up. "Give me your phone, Marcus. We need to make sure no one else is involved in this." Reluctantly, Marcus handed over his phone. He watched as Harris quickly scanned through the messages and then made a call. Lawson, too, was watching closely, his eyes never leaving Marcus. After a few minutes, Harris hung up and turned to Marcus. "We need to keep you safe for now. There are people looking for you. And they won't stop until they get what they want." Marcus's world felt like it was spinning out of control. He had no idea who these people were, what they wanted, or how to get out of this mess. But one thing was clear, his life had changed forever. Marcus couldn't remember the last time his heart had felt this heavy. Every word, every detail, felt like a chain wrapped around his chest, pulling him deeper into a world he couldn't understand. The officers had insisted he stay at the building with Lawson, citing that it was the safest place for him. But nothing felt safe. Not anymore. Every corner of the sleek office building now felt like it was closing in on him. Marcus paced in the small waiting room, his mind racing. He just wanted to do the right thing. Find a wallet, return it, move on. But now, he was part of something much bigger than he ever could have imagined. It had been hours since the police had first arrived at the school. Hours since he'd been pulled from his classroom, driven away in an unmarked police car, and brought to Lawson's building, where everything was shrouded in secrecy. The walls, the people, the tension, it all felt like a nightmare. Detective Harris had been the one to bring Marcus to this room, telling him he needed to stay put while they worked to uncover more information. But Marcus couldn't sit still. He couldn't just wait. Something about the whole situation didn't feel right. What had Lawson meant when he said the wallet was tied to something bigger? What was this deal they were all talking about? Marcus had so many questions, and no answers. The more he thought about it, the more confused and scared he became. Suddenly, the door to the waiting room opened, and Detective Harris walked in, his face grim. "We need to talk." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. What's going on? Why am I still here? What did Lawson mean when he said I was involved in something dangerous? Harris gestured for Marcus to sit down. "It's not something we can explain quickly. But we'll start from the beginning. I need you to listen carefully, Marcus. This is important." Marcus sat down, his legs suddenly feeling like lead. Harris closed the door behind him, ensuring no one would overhear their conversation. He took a deep breath before speaking again. "Marcus, the wallet you found wasn't just some regular wallet. It belonged to Richard Lawson, yes, but it wasn't the contents that made it dangerous. It was the connection to him. Lawson is deeply involved in high-stakes business deals. Deals that go far beyond what you or I would ever consider. But it's not just the deals themselves. It's the people he's connected to, the people who don't take kindly to anyone getting in the way." Marcus's mind was racing as he tried to process what the detective was saying. So, the wallet had information in it? What kind of information? Harris's face tightened. It wasn't just business information. It was a list. A list of names, people connected to Lawson's most recent deals. And not just any names. These are people involved in activities that are, far from legal. People with power, Marcus. People who would kill to protect what's theirs. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't realized it before, but now, as Harris spoke, he began to understand the gravity of the situation. The wallet wasn't just a lost item. It was a key to something much larger. A key to a world he had no business being a part of. Harris leaned in, lowering his voice. And here's the part you're not going to like, Marcus. When you returned the wallet, you made yourself a target. The moment Lawson got that wallet back, it triggered something. Someone is looking for that list. Someone who will stop at nothing to get their hands on it. And now, Marcus, you're in the middle of it. Marcus could feel his heart racing. His head swam with the implications. But I didn't do anything. I just returned it. How is that my fault? Harris gave him a sympathetic look, but his expression was serious. It's not your fault, Marcus. But the people we're dealing with, they don't care about guilt or innocence. They care about what's valuable. And that list? It's valuable. It's dangerous. And now they know you're involved, whether you like it or not. Marcus stood up, his hands shaking. He felt trapped. There was no way out. Everything had spiraled out of control in a matter of hours. What was he supposed to do now? He had no answers, no way to make sense of it all. Harris's voice cut through his thoughts. We're going to protect you, Marcus. But you need to stay calm. You need to trust us. If we're going to stop whatever's coming, we need your help. Marcus stared at the detective, still reeling from everything he had learned. How can I help? What do I know? I don't even understand what's going on. We need to know everything you remember about the wallet, Harris said, his tone firm. Everything. Every detail, no matter how small. The more we know, the better we can figure out what's really going on. Marcus sat back down, his mind still in a fog. He tried to recall the moment when he had found the wallet. It had been in the parking lot. He had picked it up, looked inside briefly, and seen only cash and a couple of cards. He hadn't thought much of it. He hadn't even looked at the name on the ID. But now, thinking back, there was something odd about the wallet. Something that stood out. He hadn't given it much attention at the time, but it felt like he should have. There was a name on the ID, Marcus said slowly, as though the realization was hitting him for the first time. I didn't really look at it. But now that you mention it, I think the name on the ID was Richard Lawson. The same name as the owner. Harris nodded. That's good. That's important. What else do you remember? Marcus furrowed his brow, trying to recall more details. I remember the wallet being kind of expensive looking. The leather was really nice. And there were a lot of cards inside, credit cards, loyalty cards, and something else. There was a folded piece of paper, too, but I didn't open it. I didn't think I should. It seemed private. The detective's eyes narrowed. A folded piece of paper? Do you remember what it looked like? Marcus thought hard. It was small, just folded in half. I didn't want to mess with it. I figured I'd just return the wallet as it was. Harris stood up, his expression turning serious. That piece of paper could be the key, Marcus. We've been trying to track down who had access to that wallet. If it had information on it, then it's possible it could be the missing link we need. Marcus felt a sense of dread settle in. He hadn't realized the gravity of what he had found. To him, it had just been a simple wallet. But now, with everything Harris was telling him, it was becoming clear that this was more than just a simple mistake. Harris spoke again, his voice steady. We've already sent people to check the area where you found the wallet. We're trying to figure out how this connects to Lawson's other dealings. And we're doing everything we can to keep you safe. Marcus nodded, still feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. So, what happens now? What do I do? Harris placed a hand on his shoulder. Now, you wait. We'll need you to stay put while we investigate further. The less you know, the safer you'll be for now. But what if they come after me? Marcus's voice cracked with fear. What if they come looking for me next? Harris didn't answer immediately, but his gaze softened. We're doing everything we can to prevent that from happening. But you have to trust us. We'll protect you. Just stay calm, and don't go anywhere. We'll let you know when it's safe to leave. Marcus sat in silence, feeling a growing sense of helplessness. The world outside the waiting room felt distant and foreign. He was no longer just a regular teenager. He was a pawn in a game he didn't understand. And the worst part was, he had no idea who the players were or what they wanted. Marcus couldn't sleep. It wasn't just the constant ticking of the clock on the wall or the echo of footsteps in the hallway outside his room. It was the weight of everything, the phone call from Detective Harris hours ago, the discovery of the wallet, and the revelations that had followed. What was he even supposed to think? 1 minute, he was just a regular teenager trying to make it through another school day. The next, he was tangled up in something far bigger than himself. The world outside the safe room he was confined to felt like a blur. His school friends, his family, his future, it all seemed so distant now. What did his life even mean if he was stuck in this nightmare? The more Marcus thought about it, the more his stomach churned. How had he gotten to this point? The door creaked open, snapping him out of his thoughts. Detective Harris stood there, his posture rigid and his eyes serious. We've made progress. But I need you to listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you is going to change everything. Marcus stood up slowly, his body tense. What's going on? What happened? Harris motioned for him to sit back down. The wallet, Marcus. That piece of paper you didn't open, it wasn't just some random document. We've seen it before. That paper ties into something much darker than just some shady business deals. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. What do you mean? Harris didn't waste any time. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, Marcus. That paper has a name. A name tied to a series of crimes that stretch back years, some of them linked to organized crime, some to political corruption, and some, well, some of it's even more dangerous than that. Whoever put that paper in the wallet wanted it to be found. They knew someone would return it, and they were counting on that. Marcus felt his blood run cold. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't wanted any of it. He had just found a wallet on the ground and returned it, thinking that was the end of it. Now, it seemed like his good deed had dragged him into a criminal web that stretched across the city, maybe even further. What is on that paper, Harris? What's on it that's so important? Marcus asked, his voice shaky. He was almost afraid to know. Names, Harris said bluntly. Names of people involved in a series of covert operations. Names tied to the highest levels of organized crime in this city. And the person at the top? Well, that's where it gets complicated. Marcus's heart thudded in his chest. Who? The name on the paper was that of a woman. Her name is Serena Dupree. She's been a ghost in the system for years, but we've managed to trace her connections. She's linked to multiple high-profile crimes, from money laundering to trafficking, and worse. But here's where it gets really twisted, she's somehow connected to Richard Lawson. Marcus blinked, trying to process the words. Lawson? The man whose wallet I found? Yes, Harris confirmed, pacing as he spoke. Lawson's not just some business tycoon, Marcus. He's a front. A cover for someone much bigger. The deals he's involved in, drugs, weapons, money laundering, they all trace back to Serena Dupree. And now that you've returned that wallet, you've caught the attention of some very dangerous people. A wave of nausea washed over Marcus. He couldn't wrap his head around it. This was all too much. His mind struggled to find a way out, a way to erase himself from the tangled mess he was now in. You mean to say Lawson has been involved in this all along? And I'm caught in the middle of it? Marcus asked, his voice strained. Harris nodded grimly. Exactly. The wallet you returned, it wasn't just a coincidence. It was the link in the chain that the people Serena Dupree works with have been waiting for. Now, they're watching you. And they won't stop until they've erased any trace of what's been exposed. Marcus clenched his fists. So, what do I do? I don't even know where to begin. I'm just a kid. I didn't sign up for this. Harris's face softened, and he sat across from Marcus. I know this is hard to understand, but we're not leaving you alone in this. We're going to protect you, but we need your help. The paper you found is crucial to taking down a network that's been operating under the radar for far too long. We need to track down Dupree and her people before they can cover their tracks completely. Marcus was silent for a long time, processing everything Harris had said. It felt like he was in a bad dream. But one thing was clear, the danger wasn't just from Dupree's associates anymore. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that even the police might not be enough to keep him safe. What happens if they come after me? Marcus asked, his voice trembling slightly. We'll do everything we can to protect you, Harris said, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. But you need to stay hidden. Lay low for now. Don't make any unnecessary moves. Just trust us, Marcus. We'll figure this out. Marcus wanted to trust Harris. He wanted to believe that everything would be okay. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. He'd been thrown into a war he didn't understand, and no one could protect him forever. The next few days felt like an eternity for Marcus. He spent his time in a secure location provided by the police, constantly under surveillance. He felt like a prisoner in his own life, unable to leave the small room where he was confined. It wasn't just the physical isolation that bothered him, it was the gnawing feeling of helplessness that settled over him, the constant fear that someone was always watching. Marcus tried his best to keep his mind occupied. He read books, watched the news, and tried to ignore the overwhelming dread that had become a constant companion. He didn't speak much, keeping to himself in the sterile, quiet space. Every time the door opened, his heart skipped a beat. It was always someone from the police force, always someone who told him there was no new information. They had no leads, no way to track down Serena Dupree, and no clear direction on how to stop the people after him. It was a Wednesday afternoon when everything changed. Marcus had been lying on the small bed, trying to relax, when his phone buzzed. His heart skipped a beat as he glanced at the screen. It was a text from an unknown number. You have something that doesn't belong to you. We're coming for you. Marcus's blood ran cold. It was as if the walls had closed in on him, the air thick with the promise of danger. He quickly showed the message to Harris when the detective arrived minutes later, his face pale. They know, Marcus said, his voice tight with fear. Harris cursed under his breath. This is bad. They've found out about you, Marcus. They're coming for you. We need to move you, now. But it was already too late, the world had never felt smaller. Marcus sat on the cold, uncomfortable chair, his legs trembling under the weight of fear and confusion. The room around him felt increasingly claustrophobic. Every tick of the clock on the wall was like a countdown to something horrible. He could feel it in his bones, they were coming for him. The message had been a warning, a promise, that someone was on their way. It had been hours since the text, and he still didn't know who was coming, but his gut told him that whatever was about to happen, it wouldn't be good. Detective Harris stood by the window, scanning the street below, his face hardened with determination. He had been silent for a long time, but Marcus could see the tension in the way his shoulders were hunched. There were no words to comfort him now. No reassurances. The situation had escalated beyond their control. The people after him were ruthless, and the police were one step behind. "Marcus," Harris said, his voice low but steady, "we have a plan, but I need you to listen carefully. When they come for you, we need to act fast. There's a safe house nearby where you'll be protected. But once you leave here, there's no turning back." Marcus barely heard him. His mind was racing. Safe house? Was he supposed to go into hiding for the rest of his life? Was that even a life anymore? Was this his new reality? His future had been stolen from him, and the weight of it crushed him in waves. "Do you understand?" Harris pressed, snapping Marcus out of his spiral. Marcus nodded stiffly, his throat dry. "I understand," he whispered. But the truth was, he didn't know what to believe anymore. His entire world had turned upside down since he had picked up that wallet. He thought it would be a simple act of kindness. Instead, he had been thrust into a nightmare he couldn't escape from. Harris seemed to read the doubt in his eyes. "You're going to be okay. We have every resource at our disposal. Just stay calm and trust us." Marcus couldn't bring himself to respond. How could he trust anyone when the very people who were supposed to protect him were outpaced by the enemies they were fighting? He was starting to wonder if there was anyone on his side at all. It was then that Marcus heard the sound of tires screeching to a halt outside. His breath caught in his throat, and his heart pounded so loudly in his chest that it felt like it might explode. "They're here," Harris said flatly, moving quickly to the door. Marcus stood frozen. This was it. His mind was in overdrive, but all his thoughts seemed to blur together. It had been building to this moment, he knew it was only a matter of time. But now that the moment had arrived, he wasn't sure what came next. Without another word, Harris ushered Marcus out of the room, through the back door of the building, and into the narrow alley that led to the parking lot behind. As they moved quickly but quietly, Marcus could hear the distant hum of voices, too distant to be the police, but too close to be comfortable. Harris was tense, his gun pressed tightly to his side. His face, usually calm, now looked strained. "Stay close," Harris muttered. Marcus's pulse quickened. His legs felt like jelly, but he kept his eyes forward, trying not to let panic overtake him. They reached a black SUV waiting in the shadows. Without hesitation, Harris pushed Marcus into the back seat, slammed the door shut, and hopped into the front. "Drive. Now," Harris ordered. The car sped off with a sudden jolt, its tires screeching as they left the safety of the alley and joined the main road. Marcus glanced over his shoulder at the darkened building they had just left, and a cold shiver ran down his spine. He could feel the weight of everything that had happened, and everything that was still to come. As the car swerved around corners and sped through the winding streets, Marcus's mind raced. Who were these people? What did they want? What had he stumbled into? And most importantly, would he ever be safe again? The further they drove, the more Marcus realized that there was no escape. The police had tried to protect him. Harris had tried. But the power and reach of Serena Dupree and the people she worked for seemed endless. Every turn, every twist, felt like they were being hunted, like something dark and powerful was waiting for them at every corner. After what felt like an eternity, the car came to a screeching halt in front of a modest, unassuming house on the outskirts of the city. The lights inside were dim, but the house seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful. Harris turned to Marcus. "Stay here. I'll check the perimeter." Before Marcus could say anything, Harris was out of the car and disappeared into the shadows. Marcus sat in the back seat, staring out the window. His reflection seemed hollow, his eyes dark and tired. He barely recognized himself. The boy who had once had dreams of a normal life, of graduating and starting fresh, he was gone now. In his place stood someone who had seen things, been through things, that no teenager should have to face. He pressed his palm to the glass, the coolness of it offering some kind of comfort. Outside, the night was eerily quiet. The wind rustled the leaves of the trees, but nothing moved. The silence felt wrong. It felt like the calm before a storm. Minutes passed. Then, there was a knock at the window. Marcus jumped, his heart racing. He whipped around to see Harris standing outside, his face a mask of urgency. Without hesitation, Marcus pulled open the door. "Harris, what's going on?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with fear. Harris didn't answer immediately. He scanned the surrounding area, making sure no one was watching before turning back to Marcus. "We've been compromised. We need to move." Marcus's stomach sank. "What do you mean, compromised?" "We're not safe here," Harris said in a low voice. "We need to get to the backup location. Now." Without another word, Harris grabbed Marcus by the arm, guiding him quickly toward the back of the house. But just as they reached the back door, the sound of tires screeching once again filled the air. Marcus turned, and his heart dropped when he saw headlights approaching fast. "They're here," Harris said under his breath. "Run." Marcus's feet flew across the yard, his heart hammering in his chest. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. All he knew was that the danger was real, and it was closing in on him, fast. Behind him, he could hear the crunch of gravel and the roar of an engine as someone gave chase. They weren't alone anymore. "Get inside the shed," Harris shouted, pointing to a small structure at the far end of the yard. Marcus didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward it, his legs burning, his breath ragged. He glanced back only once to see a black SUV speeding toward them. The same car that had chased them before. He reached the shed, slammed the door shut behind him, and held his breath. Inside, it was dark and musty. There was barely enough room to breathe, but it was better than being out in the open. The sound of his heart was deafening in his ears as he crouched low, waiting for whatever was next. The seconds dragged on. The world seemed to hold its breath. He could hear the muffled sound of footsteps outside, moving closer. Closer. Then, a voice broke through the silence. "Where is he?" Marcus froze. Harris's voice was calm but firm. "I don't know. We lost him." Marcus's stomach twisted. He had been spotted. The truth was out there, and it was coming for him.